I'll start our next story with a question. Do you remember the Wuhan virus pandemic? 3 years of lockdowns, deaths, vaccines, restrictions, and relentless paranoia. While the world was busy trying to keep themselves safe, some world leaders were busy making ridiculous comments. Leaders like Boris Johnson. He was the Prime Minister of the UK then, and he severely botched up the pandemic response of his country. But that wasn't even his concern. Boris Johnson was busy figuring out, and listen to this, if you could kill the virus by blowing a hairdryer up your nose. I'm not making this up. He asked this question and other ridiculous ones. He also called the virus nature's way of dealing with old people. Our next report tells you more.
227,000 people. That's how many people died from the Wuhan virus in the UK. In the first and second waves, it had the highest death toll per person. The healthcare system was overwhelmed. People were locked inside their homes and they couldn't even go meet their loved ones. But what was their Prime Minister doing? Boris Johnson was busy asking the hard-hitting questions like, does a hairdryer kill the virus? Yes, that's something that a world leader said. And it wasn't even the worst part. The UK is investigating the government's handling of the pandemic, and it has exposed its leaders, like Boris Johnson. One of his former advisors say Boris Johnson was frustrating. He was obsessed with older people accepting their fate. He wanted to keep the economy going, and he wanted to protect the young. But in the case of the old, he was okay with letting them die. He said so in an exchange, and I quote, "COVID is just nature's way of dealing with old people." Imagine that. Thousands die in your country, and instead of trying to protect them, you call COVID nature's way of dealing with old people. Plus, many say Johnson wasn't up to the job. They called him terrible at handling the pandemic. They said he was oscillating between decisions. Tells you why the UK's COVID response was so bad. This was the government that was handling it. A government that was hosting lockdown parties. A government that was okay with old people dying. A government that just wanted to keep the economy running. But Johnson wasn't the only world leader who messed up. Remember Donald Trump? He was the President of the United States back then, a country with one of the highest COVID death tolls. And what did he do? He suggested injecting bleach to kill the virus. Then there was his Brazilian counterpart, Jair Bolsonaro. He compared COVID to a mild flu. Turkey's strongman leader was no better. Erdogan wanted to keep the economy going no matter what. Shows you the problem with mercurial world leaders. They place selfish interest ahead of public good. Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, Jair Bolsonaro. They were all the same. When the pandemic broke out, the world trusted these people. Their countries relied on them to do the best. But instead, they were busy suggesting quack measures. They were making ridiculous statements as thousands died. 3 years later, the world may have survived them, and some are even out of office. But it shows you why leadership matters in the face of a crisis.